Hi guys, what's up? So, how do you buy a good issue of Heavy Metal Magazine? How do you know you're going to get a great issue of Heavy Metal Magazine? Sometimes in the 70s and 80s and the 90s, heavy metal was like good most of the time. It was really good. You could buy one and chances are you'll enjoy at least some of it, or at least most of it, if it's a really good issue, and sometimes all of it. But in the 2000s, heavy metal became very hit or miss. And a lot of the times, you get really kind of like, you start liking this really, really cool cover. The cover is always amazing. So I always think of it like, hey, if I paid for the magazine and I didn't like anything inside, at least I got a cool cover out of it, this is like a print-worthy cover. You could put this up on your wall if you wanted to. But so how do you know you're going to get the right magazine? It's very, very hit or miss sometimes, but here's a few ways of knowing that the magazine is going to be good. Going by the cover, you can't really go by the cover. The cover is always good. It's like 100% of the time. I've never seen like any other magazine have a cover that's always good, always great, every time the magazine comes out. So that's the thing. And I've seen in some comic book stores that they have them in a bag. They have it like in a bag, and it's kind of a good idea, and it's also not a good idea to have them in like a bag. The good idea about having them in the bag is they don't get damaged. So when you buy it, it's in mint condition. The not good idea about having it in a bag is that you can't look inside of it. But there is a trick you can do. You can you can go online and type up the issue of the Heavy Metal Magazine you want to see, and you can get a few glimpses of what's inside. Or a good idea would be to just tell the comic book people, hey, can I look inside this magazine? Because I want to see if it's good. So I would recommend, if it's in a bag and you can't look inside it, I don't recommend to buy it. I think you could still buy it if you can't look inside the magazine. But the thing is that sometimes, you won't know exactly if you're going to be into the stories. Because I would say, try to buy a heavy metal magazine that you can open and look through. Because you can't really tell with the stories, but at least you'll know if you like the art. A lot of times with heavy metal is that really good art is also a really, really good story, because good artists like to collaborate with good writers, mostly. So if you see the art inside is really, really good and speaks to you, chances are that you'll like at least some of that Heavy Metal Magazine. If you get Heavy Metal Magazine from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, chances are it's going to be good, because during that time, almost every time the magazine came out, they had stellar content. They had Moebius and all these great, amazing artists and writers, Simon Beasley, Boris Vallejo, all of these people, they had all of these artists and writers in Heavy Metal Magazine at the time, and they were just coming out with stellar stuff. While other Marvel and DC was coming out with superheroes, which is cool if you guys like superheroes. I'm not too into superheroes. I prefer sci-fi, fantasy, and different kinds of stories in comic books. But the thing is that heavy metal was coming out with amazing science fiction, fantasy, adventure, a little bit of horror, some occult stuff and stuff like that. And it was really, really amazing. In 2000s to about 2010 or something, until Grant Morrison took over as chief editor, there was a very, very slope. I would go to the comic book store, see the heavy metal, and remember how great the stories were from before in the 80s and 90s, how great the stories were, thinking and how cool the cover looks. And sometimes those magazines would be in a plastic thing, which was they wouldn't let you look inside. So I'd be okay, I'll pay the $7.99 and I'll buy it, and I'll probably like some of it. And a lot of the times I was kind of disappointed, because I would like open it, try to read through it, and just not be able to even read the story because it was really they took a dip. They weren't like, I'm sure that like some people would like the stories because they kept, people kept buying them and reading them and stuff like that. But it's just that compared to the 80s and 90s when those stories were amazing, the 2000s was a bit of a letdown. And then I found that when Grant Morrison took over, the magazine went back up, and after that you can pretty much, I think it just went up to like around $10 an issue though, which is okay because inflation, but I found that the stories got a lot better because I think Grant Morrison has a really good taste for the style of story that Heavy Metal Magazine should have. Also, like ways to buy Heavy Metal Magazine, like the new issue is usually, you're probably gonna have to pay full price for that new issue that's coming out every month or whatever, right? But the older issues, a lot of times you can get them in great condition on sale. So like you might be able to get that issue from the 70s, 80s, and 90s in a comic book shop, or basically in a comic book shop, because other places really don't have them. And you could kind of get the back issues on sale. So find out if your comic book shop has back issues of Heavy Metal Magazine, because you can get them on sale for like $5, and the stories are really good. And whenever you're looking at back issues, you can always read the front of it and see what artists and writers were in it, and you can like find a lot of really good artists and writers that were making the comic book at the time, and you can find like a lot of like you can see if your favorite artist and writer is inside the magazine. And also the cool thing about back issues, because they're not new, you can open them up and flip through them, right? So usually you'll be able to tell if the art is good. There's really no way to tell if the story is going to be something you like, but at least you can see if the art is good. And usually when the art is really good, the story's also good. But even if the story is not that great, at least the art is nice and you can enjoy the art if you're just into like comic book art. So that's cool. Like if you go to back issues from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, usually those are really good. I would stay away from the issues between 2000 and 2010, or even a little bit past 2010. I would say like after the 2000s, start reading the issues that when Grant Morrison became editor, because after a few issues into that, the content went back up. I don't know if the content is as good as the 80s and 90s and whatever in the 70s, but the content is really good. It's a lot better than it was in the 2000s. What I'm really glad about with Heavy Metal is they stayed making their magazines, and I think it's just because they had such a good following, like almost a cult following. Like the comic book shops would have the magazines. People would buy the magazines, even though the stories weren't always that great, hoping that that there would be like one good story or two good stories inside. And a lot of the times people would just buy them because they started collecting them earlier on, and they wanted to keep collecting them. It's just like a nostalgic thing where they liked it in the past and they wanted to keep buying it because it really does look good, depending on the stories. The thing is, what I think about, what really I think happened with Heavy Metal is that the older editor, instead of the chief editor of Heavy Metal Magazine, the one that was doing it before, got into another thing that he was doing, which was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I think when he got into Ninja Turtles is when they really stopped paying attention too much to Heavy Metal Magazine. And then Grant Morrison, I think he was actually a fan of Heavy Metal Magazine back in the 80s and 90s, and he really wanted it's right up his alley. And his stuff, he makes comic books also, and The Invisibles and a lot of different comic books that he made, Grant Morrison made. They're like, his stories are weird and far out and on another planet. They're just on another level altogether. And it's very also influenced later on. It's very influenced by the occult. And he uses a lot of like, just like occult knowledge and whatever that he studied to put it into his stories, and they really, really work really, really well. So that's a cool way of making sure that the heavy metal magazine is going to be good. Like, flip through it, try to open up. Don't buy it if it's in a bag that you can't look inside, because it's very, very, very hit or miss. And I'm also thinking that the reason they started selling them in the bags that you couldn't open was because, and this was like at the same time as the inside of the magazine wasn't as good. And I think it's because people, they were afraid that if people started like looking inside and flipping through the pages, that they wouldn't like what they see and not buy the magazine. But if people could only see the cover, they would see how cool the cover was, and and then feel like, and then think, oh, well, the magazine, the inside must be just as good. But with comic books, usually the cover's always good, and the inside is not always as good as the cover. Usually it's not as good as the cover. So, you could save money. Also, like, if you subscribe to their email, Heavy Metal Magazine's email, like, you just like go to their website and like just subscribe, and they'll send you emails and stuff like that. And they always send you discounts on back issues. They'll mail you issues. They'll recommend issues and stuff like that. Like, recently they're sending out like issues about work that Mobius did a while ago, and how to get that and stuff like that. So it's really, really cool to get like get on their mailing list, because they will just like send you discounts and like 50% off, all kinds of things. So the good news is the older issues that were really, really good are still available, and they're definitely worth getting, because these things don't age. Those stories are good. They were good then, they're good now, and they're going to be good for the next while. They don't age. Like, those stories are amazing. If you really want to get the good heavy metal magazines, go for the magazines that came out in the 70s when they first started, the 80s and the 90s. The thing about the 70s when they first started is that the stories were like continuations. They were only in like part ones, and then the next issue they'd have part 2 and part 3, right? And then in the 80s they stopped doing that, and they started like selling complete stories instead of like in parts. So once you start getting the magazine from the 80s, you can read the whole story and everything like that. As opposed to when you get them in the 70s, you can only get parts of the story. You have to buy another issue just to read the rest of the story. So those stories are usually going to be good. Look out for like really good art, especially in the 80s. Like, look out for Mobius stories, Simon Beasley stories. Those are usually really, really good. And what's also cool about heavy metal is that you can find a lot of really good artists that do heavy metal that also do art. They're artists. They do art, the kind of art you could put on your wall, fine art and prints and everything like that. But they also did art for the heavy metal comic book. And so you can find a lot of really, really, really good artists that make really cool art that you might want to decorate your house with and whatever. Because once you start seeing that kind of art, it's really, really compelling and stuff like that. So definitely check out the older issues. Check out you can get, the thing about the issues between 2000 and 2010 around is, I didn't read all of them, because every time I bought a heavy metal issue, like during that time, I would always seriously, every time I bought it during those years, I would just like get let down because I just couldn't read it. It was just it wasn't that great. But I'm sure that so I didn't read all of the stuff that came out during that time. But I'm sure that there's some of it was good. I just haven't found any of it that was good. But a good way to tell, and then like the recent stuff, you'll note, and anything past where the editor was Grant Morrison, after that it started becoming really, really good, which I expected to be. What's interesting is, I don't know if they were doing this the whole time, but they were doing this during the 2000s, where they were taking submissions from people. You could just send them, you can draw and write a comic book or a comic strip or a few pages and whatever it is, and you could submit it to them and they will look at it and see if they want to print it in their comic book, and they would just let anyone send them submissions, but it had to be a full comic. It had to be the art and the drawing. It couldn't just be like, this is an idea for a comic, this is the drawing art for the comic. It had to be a real comic in comic book form, a finished thing. And they would go and they would judge and they would say, okay, I like this, we're gonna put that in the magazine. So I don't know. So I can't really blame like the quality of some of the stories on Heavy Metal, because they were open just to submissions. People were sending them stuff, and for some reason, I don't know like for what, but for some reason, the comics that were made for Heavy Metal during that time just weren't that great. That's just my opinion, but I find a lot of people like agree that just for some reason, even though they were taking submissions from comic book artists and people that were making comic books, for some reason during that time they weren't taking it. So and the adult content, I don't find that it's that adult content. You can find, there's a lot more adult content on the internet than there is in like Heavy Metal magazine and stuff like that. So that's a great idea to do that. Now, the thing is, if you do just get them to ship you the magazine and like mail it to you, you can't really look inside. So I would kind of like not do that. I would only buy an issue of Heavy Metal if you can actually look at the cover, look inside, and flip through, like, look at the art and everything. Look at the quality of the art, look at the quality of the stories, and just open it in the middle and just read a couple of pages. Just randomly read it and see if just by reading a couple of pages, just see if the writing is interesting or compelling or it speaks to you. Because it's sometimes the case with Heavy Metal that the art is good, but the stories are unreadable. Like they're just so hard to read, and it's even hard to enjoy really hard to enjoy the art if you don't also enjoy the story. You really want the story. Heavy Metal at its best has great stories and great art, and they're just fantasy and far out and sci-fi and all kinds of genre, otherworldly stuff, but you want to make sure, you really want to read a little bit into it. You don't want to buy a Heavy Metal that's in a bag or the one that they ship to you, right? You want to like pick it up, open it up, and look inside. Because I find that whenever you can't look inside of a Heavy Metal, it's usually not that great. The Heavy Metals that are good and they know is good, they let you look inside, because when people open up a good Heavy Metal, they look inside, they see how cool it is, they're compelled to buy it, and I feel like when they have a Heavy Metal magazine in a bag, they're kind of like afraid you're going to look inside and say, oh, this sucks, I'm not going to get it, so they don't want you to look inside because I always think that whenever they don't let you look inside, it's because it sucks and you wouldn't like it if you did, so that's cool. Now, I know, there's a lot of older stuff with Heavy Metal. It's like the 80s, 90s, 70s. That stuff is great, great, great. The Heavy Metal magazines that are coming out now are really good. Right now, they're not as good as in the past, but they're really, really good. They're worth buying. They're not that expensive. I mean, a comic book is like $3.99 average, and it's like got 20 pages, and a Heavy Metal is like, I don't know, is it $8, $10 right now, and it's got like over 100 pages of content, and not just one story, but a bunch of stories, several stories. And what's cool about that is that even if you don't like some of it, you'll like some of it. And I think the value is really good with Heavy Metal when it's good, that the value is really, really good because you get a lot of content. It pretty much like, it's cool. It's like as much content as like half of a trade paperback, but the only difference with a trade paperback is just one story and that's it. With Heavy Metal, it's usually multiple stories, so that's cool. So you don't just you don't just like find one story that you like or you don't. You might not like one story, but you might like a different story. And also what's really cool is you'll find cool artists and writers that once you like the artist art and the writer's story, you can find more stuff by them usually, and it's usually just as good. So that's a really cool way of finding it out. It's really hard to know. Heavy metal's been around for a long time, and they have so many stories and stuff, but you want to always get a good heavy metal magazine, because you know, when you buy a heavy metal magazine and it's not that great, it's like $6 and $10. It's like, you don't want to like spend $6 to $10 or whatever and be completely disappointed by getting something that you don't want to read, you know? So look, you can't just tell by the cover. The cover is always good, you know? So look inside, just flip through it, see if you like the art. If not, just try a different issue, because there's just so many different issues, and there's just so many different artists and writers that were in there. It's just such a variety. There might be stuff that one person likes that another person doesn't, and vice versa, you know, and another person likes that somebody else doesn't. So that's the thing. So you really want to get the issue that speaks to you. So open it up, look through it, and just spend a few minutes just reading into it. You know, don't buy it from a place that doesn't let you read the magazine. Don't buy it from a place that you can't look inside of it. You know, look inside, open it up, read a few pages, and that's the best way to tell. And another really good way to tell is if you already have favorite artists and writers, find out if they made anything for heavy metal, because a lot of them did. Really good artists and writers did write for heavy metal at some point. Find out if they did anything for heavy metal and find out what issue that was. And you can buy that issue directly, whether it's through online, or you can go to a comic book shop and see if they have that issue, or you can buy it on the internet, you know, whatever, or you can buy from somebody else that has that issue. So that's another way of knowing that you'll like the story, is if you know you like the artist. Like if you like Moebius, chances are, you know, if you buy the issues that had Moebius in it, chances are you'll like those stories. So those are a bunch of ways. I'm sure there's other ways of doing it, but there's a bunch of ways. Those are a bunch of ways of knowing like how to get a really good heavy metal magazine. Because when you get it and it's good, then it's awesome. And when it's not as good, it's like a bit of a letdown. So yeah, so if you guys like the video, please like and subscribe, and comment if you want to comment anything. And I'll see you guys in another video. Take care.